All righty. Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn. How are we doing? I'm here with my buddy, Mike Robbins. Mike, how are you, sir?
I'm good, man. I'm glad to be here with you and everybody who's joining us live or watching the video this after.
That's right, man. Yeah. 3,000 miles away? I guess that's pretty common these days.
That's right.
Well, thanks for taking a few minutes of your time. I know you're busy running around this afternoon. You've been busy. You have another book that you came out with. Early summer?
It actually came out in April, so it's been
late spring, I guess. Yeah, early spring, I guess. Yeah. So, Mike, I know you. I've been following you for a long time, but maybe you can just fill the audience in. The 30-second of you, and then we'll jump right in.
Sure. Well, it might be a little longer than 30 seconds. I'm not always the most short-winded, but basically, Chris, I've had a business for the last 20 years that focuses on leadership, teamwork, company culture, and my most recent book, We're All in This Together, kind of encapsulates the work I've been doing for the last 20 years. But my background, I was a baseball player, played baseball in college at Stanford, then played professionally with the Kansas City Royals for a few years before I got injured. But have been fascinated from my years of playing baseball. I became fascinated by teamwork and team dynamics, because sometimes I was on some teams with great talent, great players, but the team wasn't very good. And other times I was on teams where, the talent was decent, not great, but the team was fantastic. We would beat other teams that had better players than we did. And I erroneously thought this was a sports thing. Then I moved home, got a job in the tech world in the late 90s and realized, well, that's not a sports thing. That's a human thing. And after working for a few tech companies in the 90s, I started my consulting business. And for the last 20 years, I've been writing books and speaking and working with leaders and teams in different industries all across the country and around the world. Although these days I'm here in my office every day, but still connecting with people virtually. So that's
And Mike has some great live feeds himself. I have his website here. Actually, I'll share that real quick, MikeRobbins.com. If you have any questions, guys, leave them in the comments. Mike has a bunch of great knowledge. All the stuff that I talk about, he's been a lot of the impetus for. I mean, he's really helped me kind of help solidify my understanding of leadership and what all it takes to build a team that's going to thrive. So, Mike, you start out the newest book, We're All in This Together, which is quite aptly named. On my Facebook page, actually, there is the I can't remember what you call the back picture, but it says We're All in This Together, and it's been on there for about a year or so. So you and I have been thinking about this for way longer than just this pandemic. But with that, there's obviously more challenges, and challenges have been kind of increased, I guess you might say. You start the book out talking, which I'm a little bit unhappy about the Golden State Warriors and their run. So it's actually just funny because my wife and I had these conversations about super teams. And I always say, I hate super teams, the Yankees back in the 90s and whoever LeBron ends up playing with. But then she says, wait a second, you went to Alabama. And I'm like, yeah, but college is a little bit different, right? So anyway, but yeah, so maybe you can speak to that. I think hospitality is about as close to sports as you can get. The camaraderie you create with the tandem, the contact is very similar.
Right. Well, a couple of things I'll say for what it's. I've been was an athlete for all of my young life, and have been a sports fan, ever since I can remember. I think sports, there's a lot of parallels to hospitality, obviously, business in general. But what's interesting about, and I use the Warriors as an example. So I grew up in Oakland,
right?
Still live in the Bay Area, and for what it's worth, the Warriors were terrible forever.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons the Warriors were terrible for so long, though, was they actually had some decent talent over the years, and they would draft well and draft high, at least I should say, because they usually weren't very good, and they'd get a high draft pick. But they had a culture of failure, of losing, of mistrust, of from the front office to the players to even the fans. And we're huge basketball fans here in the Bay Area. And unlike football and baseball, where we had two teams for a long time, although the Raiders just left last year to move to Las Vegas, in basketball, we have one team. And so everybody in the Bay Area was a Warriors fan, even when they weren't any good. But the interesting thing is part of what, even before they became a super team and Kevin Durant joined the team, they did win a championship before that. And they built a culture that was really pretty remarkable for a couple of reasons. And again, people listening, watching may not follow basketball or know much, but like, you know, Steve Kerr became the coach of the Golden State Warriors in 2014, and he had never coached an NBA team before. He'd been a general manager, and he played for the Bulls in the 90s, and then he played for the Spurs in the early 2000s, so he won some championships. And he came into a team that was already pretty good.
Yeah.
Turned them into a championship team. And one of the things that I've heard Steve Kerr say many times is that he believes his job as a head coach is to manage the relationships of the team more than anything else. It's not about the X's and O's. It's about managing the relationships and making sure that everybody feels connected to each other. And without oversimplifying it, that is a lot of what makes a great leader, and what ultimately can create a really strong team environment is when we focus on the relationships and the human beings involved, and not simply just the outcome.
Well, and I could talk sports with you for a whole hour, but I want to touch one more thing. I don't know if you've noticed this at all, but like, you know, so Steve Kerr, you look at him, or like even like people like Doc Rivers, or like Steve Nash just became your coach. A lot of these coaches that end up, I think, being pretty successful are point guards who have to be kind of the communicators, the connectors on the court. Do you think there's a correlation there? Absolutely.
I mean, I think a lot of great coaches, you know, Doc Rivers and Steve Nash were both really great players. I mean, Steve Kerr was a role player, but played on our championship teams. But I think you often see coaches that are point guards, or in baseball, it's often the catchers that are the managers. And it's the positions that really have to be thinking about more than just themselves, right? If you're a point guard, especially the way point guards used to play when a lot of those guys were in the league, it was about distributing the ball and sort of being the captain on the court. In baseball, the catcher has to deal with all the pitchers, and they're the only ones facing the entire field while everybody's facing the batter. So I do think some of those things can lend themselves nicely. Look, in business, whether it's in hospitality or other industries, a lot of times what I even will talk about is like, look, we're not trained to work in teams, because what's teamwork called when we're in school? Cheating, right? It's like basically working together. People start to become interested in teamwork, usually in the hospitality world or in the business world, when they have to start managing people. Then it becomes in their self-interest to want the team to work well together. So part of what I talk to, whether it's people who aspire to be in leadership positions or even people who already are, is can you think more globally about what's happening and not simply just on what you're focused on or what you're good at or what your training may be? Because the reality is, in every organization, whether again it's a hospitality situation or others, you need people with multiple skill sets in order for that team to be able to thrive.
Right. Well, and I can't remember if it's in the book or not. Mike, your books are great. I feel like We're All This Together kind of is a nice bow on a lot of them together. But one of them, I know you talk about the difference between your job and your role. Maybe you could touch on that.
Yeah, I talk about that in We're All This Together. I also, my book, Bring Your Whole Self to Work, that came out 2 years ago, I touched on it as well. But so the difference is this, and we often use those words interchangeably, right? What's my job? People talk about their role. So our role is what we do specifically. So, you know, head chef, you know, general manager, you know, vice president of sales, whatever the heck. You know, I say it's what's on your business card. It's what's in your email signature. It's what's on your LinkedIn profile. Our job on a winning team, everybody knows that we all have the same job, and our job is to help the team win. That's it. And when we put our role above our job, we have a problem. Like, I think about this back when I was playing baseball, right? I was a pitcher in baseball, and that was the position that I played. Now, you could either be a starting pitcher or a relief pitcher. I personally preferred to be a starting pitcher. I liked it better. It worked better for my mindset and my skill set. It also is a little bit sexier. I mean, unless you're the closer when you're a relief pitcher, I found it more challenging. But there were times when I would be in the bullpen, even though I didn't want to be. My manager would say, "Hey, Robbins, you're going to come out of the bullpen." And I was left-handed. So we're going to bring you in and try to get left-handers out. If I sat down in the bullpen, which I did sometimes, pouting because I didn't like my role, I was now not doing my job. I wasn't helping the team win.
Right. No, I love that. And again, back to sports analogies. So maybe you can briefly cover the four, and then maybe there's one or two I'd like to kind of dive into a little bit deeper.
Oh, so the four in terms of the pillars in the book?
Yeah, sorry, yep.
Yeah. Well, so the first pillar is create psychological safety. And psychological safety is basically group trust. It means the team, the group is safe enough for risk-taking, for being ourselves, for disagreeing, even for failing. Super important. And a lot of that is about the leader showing up authentically. The second pillar is focus on inclusion and belonging. So especially in today's world, but always, we got to be as inclusive as possible and really create an environment where everyone knows that they belong, regardless of what they look like or their background or their status. Super important. The third pillar is embrace what I call sweaty palm conversations, which are basically conflict, feedback, talking about sensitive issues. And the final pillar is care about and challenge each other. So what that means is we got to first and foremost care about one another, value each other, nurture each other, and we also got to really push each other to be our absolute best.
Right. So and those that are watching have definitely heard me talk about sweaty palm conversations.
Yeah.
So as you look at a lot of challenges, a lot of employee retention challenges, a lot of incentive challenges, a lot of maybe ego challenges as well. You set them up in a way, are they maybe not chronological, but you kind of they build on each other, I guess you might say.
They do. I mean, we got to start with psychological safety because that's kind of the foundation.
Right.
And if the team is psychologically safe, it becomes easier to focus on inclusion and belonging. Once you create that sense of belonging, now it's easier for us to have those sweaty palm conversations because I'm not, our relationship is not at stake every time I have to talk about something sensitive. And then ultimately the caring about and challenging each other is about how we perform at the highest level. So, I mean, they all are important in and of themselves, but they do kind of build on one another. And the way that I wrote the book, like I write a lot of my books, this one in particular, I really wrote it with the idea that teams would read it together or do some of the exercises together because it's really designed, you can benefit from it as an individual, as a leader, absolutely, but it's really designed to bring some of these conversations and ideas into the actual team and the people that you work with.
Yeah, no, it's great. And so an example, when you think of hospitality, of psychological safety might be, all right, like everybody come together and bring us a special for this weekend coming up. And I can bring you my best idea, which you might think is complete crap, but you're going to not make me feel like an idiot in front of the whole staff.
Exactly. I mean, because look, you know this better than I do, given your background. And as a chef, it's a very creative process, but it's also vulnerable, right? As we bring ideas forward. And in a kitchen, I would imagine, in general, in a restaurant, both back of house, front of house, there's a lot of synergy that has to happen for all of that. If I, show up at the restaurant to have a positive experience, there's a whole bunch of literally cooks in the kitchen that have to make all of that happen in order for me to have that experience. I may not see it, understand it, even fully appreciate it, but I'll know if I have a positive experience or a negative one. And it's not simply just based on the head chef. He or she has a big role to play, but so did everybody else in that process of getting that meal out to me and ultimately having me have a positive experience from the time I show up to the time I leave.
Yeah, and you can almost maybe sometimes tell if the waitress just got yelled at because she took the wrong dish, the wrong table, and she's on pins and needles versus, okay, she took it out the wrong table. We can't do anything about that now. What's next? Let's get her, and let's roll with the punches and figure out. And then any sort of issues we can deal with down the road, right?
Totally. A friend of mine named Chip Conley, who's a great author and speaker and very successful entrepreneur in the hospitality industry, started a company called Joie de Vivre that became one of the most boutique hotel chains in the U.S. And one of the things Chip talked about from his experience running all of those hotels and those properties, because he's an expert in a lot of things, but particularly in customer service and culture. And he said, you can tell a lot about a culture of an organization, particularly in hospitality, by the authenticity of the greeting that you receive when you show up. He said, look, we knew that in our hotels and our restaurants and our places, when people were treated well and they really felt like they were part of something, that they would just naturally treat, customers and guests that way. And if they weren't, even if they put on their best face and they had their best behavior, just to your point, if someone gets yelled at in the kitchen and comes out, I don't necessarily know that just happened, but I'll be able to feel it in my interaction with that person. So focusing on the culture of the team is also a way to focus on the customer experience simultaneously, because those two things go together.
And so to start there, is it understanding, having a general sense of, all right, this is who we are, this is what we stand for, having your kind of core principles, and then this is what's okay, this is what's not okay, and how do you make sure everybody's on the same page, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, it's a process. I mean, having some things in place, here are some of our core values, here's how we operate, so the framework is there. Again, think about it in sports. It's like, we're talking a lot about basketball, but it's like, if you go play for the San Antonio Spurs, there's a certain way that Coach Popovich and the Spurs operate. So when you go into that system, here's how we play, here's how we operate, here are some of the things that we do. You're going to be influenced by that. At the same time, it's important, as Steve Kerr talks about, to really invest in the relationships and connecting with each other. So we have to create the framework. These are often, again, core values or behaviors or things. But then we have to constantly nurture our relationships with each other, because any team, any organization is made up of individual relationships with human beings, and those need to be nurtured.
Yeah, well, and I'm reminded of going back to Steve Kerr and The Last Dance with Michael Jordan, where I remember there's one, I can't remember, it's towards the end, but Michael Jordan, he's like, if you don't want to play like that, then don't play like that. But basically, and he's getting teary-eyed, because that's, for him, that's what it means to play basketball. And and some kitchens are really high strung, where everything has to be perfect, tweezers and pretty plates. Some kitchens are buffalo chicken sandwiches. Right. Not one's not necessarily better than the other, but and so maybe in hiring, knowing those things and knowing kind of what to look for in people, I guess, is super helpful as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think being clear about, here's how we play, this is how we operate, this is what we expect, so that people know coming in what they're signing up for, right? And I mean, look, again, a kitchen, like a sports team, in the heat of the moment, right? You talk about Michael Jordan and The Last Dance, and we're talking about Steve Kerr. I mean, they talked about, or Steve talked about, both of them did, how they got into a fist fight at practice, right? Mm-hmm. And like, Kerr punched Jordan and Jordan, punched Kerr back, but it was like, that actually ended up being a pivotal moment in their relationship, but also in that team's relationship with each other. It's like, hey, we're going to play this way and we're going to hold this standard. Look, the thing though about it is, it's okay to have a really high standard and a really high bar. However, it's also essential that there's a high level of caring and nurturing of each other, because if that's not the case, if there's just a high bar, you can hold that bar for a while and people will step up and they will do it, but it's not sustainable, right? People burn out, they leave, like, not interested.
It's like the external rewards versus internal rewards, right? Motivation, yeah,
absolutely.
So one of the probably the biggest thing, and this is where I'd like to spend the chunk of what we have left, and I do have a few questions from some people that messaged me earlier, but one of the biggest challenges is sweaty palm conversations. I think probably in any industry, in any relationship, right? I know my relationship would be in a better place if I were to have this sweaty palm conversation all the time. And how do you handle those? How do you deal with that when you, like in the book you talk about, like, you're not wanting to hurt somebody's feelings?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, this comes from, a mentor of mine said to me years ago, Mike, what stands between you and the kind of relationships you want to have with people is usually a 10-minute sweaty palm conversation you're too afraid to have. Mm-hmm. And he's right. So they're scary. And I think it's important to acknowledge that they can be scary. Most of us don't like them. They can sometimes go sideways. That's why we avoid them. That said, I think our ability to lean into the discomfort of the sweaty palm conversation is really important. And And part of the way that I almost always start a sweaty palm conversation myself is acknowledging my own fear or my own discomfort authentically. Like, if I were going to have, if you and I needed to talk about something and I was scared to talk about it, Chris, I might just say, hey, Chris, man, can we talk about something? I'm a little scared to bring this up. I don't want to make things worse. I don't want things to go sideways, but it's important. You know, I mean, just letting the person know authentically, vulnerably, this is scary, but it's important and I want to talk about it. And the thing about it is, you know, there's a great saying that I just heard more recently that I've been using, which is, you know, bad news doesn't age well. It's more like fish and less like wine. So we don't want it when there's some bad news or there's some issue or some conflict or something. We've all had the experience where we avoid it or we don't talk about it or we don't want to bring it up because it might get funky or whatever. And then it just gets worse.
Right.
Like the fish, it starts going bad. It starts to smell. It starts to be a problem. And then by the time we deal with it, it's now become this big thing that if we had just dealt with it initially, it wouldn't have been easy, but it would have been a heck of a lot easier than waiting for so long. So, and I think creating within the environment some ground rules, talking about, hey, how are we going to engage in conflict or disagreement or feedback, proactively talking about that before an issue comes up. So we have some rules of engagement. Usually we don't deal with it until we have to deal with it. And now you and I have a big fight and it's a problem. And we're like, oh, we didn't really think about this. But like even the best relationships and the best teams, there's always going to be conflict. When I work with a team, Chris, and people say, oh, we never have any conflict. Everyone gets along great all the time. I'm always like, red flag. People are lying if that's the case. You can't have a group of passionate, talented people together who are really committed to success without there being some sense of, you know, disagreement or seeing things differently. That's just part of the deal.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's kind of just maybe lukewarm, where it's not great.
Yeah.
And then so how do you one of the other challenges I hear all the time, and that Candace messaged me earlier mentioning having people that she's not the leader or the person in charge, but she has people that she works side by side with, right, that she feels, you know, aren't pulling their weight. So first of all, I think you can step up and be a leader in some capacity there, but also how do you approach that? So because the last thing you want to do is keep coming back to work. You have this axe that keeps grinding down. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, look, it's tricky. I mean, I think we call that sort of influence without authority, right? It's like whether it's a peer or it's someone else, hey, I'm not the boss. So my job, look, even when you are the boss, it's still hard to influence people.
Yeah.
Right. But when you're not the boss, if you and I are peers and it seems like I have an issue, I don't think you're pulling your weight, it's tricky. I mean, I could go to the boss, which is one way to handle it, which usually isn't the most ideal. But if I don't feel safe enough to go to you, or I do go to you and you kind of blow me off, maybe I do need to go to the boss. But look, there's really only two ways to influence people in life, whether it's a peer, whether they report to us, whether we report to them, whether we're married to them or they're a friend or related to us or whatever. One way to influence someone is to model that which we want, right? Do the thing. So if I want people to work harder, I can work harder. If I want people to be kinder, I can be kinder. If I want people to listen more, I can listen more. If I want people to take more risks, I can take more risks, whatever, right? So I model it. The other way to influence people is to give them feedback. Now, not feedback like you're not pulling your weight, because that's judgment. They're going to defend themselves against that. But feedback like, what's the impact of what they're doing on us? Can we authentically and vulnerably, like, I'm feeling resentful or I'm feeling frustrated because, you know, and whatever, just sharing with them authentically how we're actually feeling. What's the impact of their behavior? They might, not guaranteed, but they might listen to that and hear, oh, wow, I'm having a negative impact on someone. Most people don't want to have a negative impact on other people.
Right.
If we can articulate what that is authentically, it might get them to at least pause and go, what? Why are you thinking that? Or why are you feeling that? Or, you know what I mean? Some curiosity, and that can make a difference.
Well, and like you said, most people don't want to have a bad impact on other people. Most people don't want to walk into work like that person, unmotivated or frustrated. So then it's like, all right, well, why are they feeling this way? Who knows? Could be a number of reasons. So one of the things that I suggest, and this maybe along the same lines, is I suggest is find something small they're doing, and not like in a condescending way, but legitimate. Like, hey, that hollandaise sauce you made for brunch like last Sunday, that was perfect.
Yes.
And then they get that reinforcement, and it's like, oh, like maybe I am good at this. Maybe I should do more of this. I like to hear this kind of feedback, and then in doing so, they hopefully do more of the same behavior.
Absolutely. I mean, look, a big part of my work for all the 20 years I've been doing this, Chris, is about appreciation. And now there's a difference between recognition, which is about performance and outcome, and appreciation, which is more about people and value. They're both important. But whether we recognize someone or we appreciate them, by proactively doing that in our relationships, it makes us stronger, it makes us more connected, and it builds more capacity for when we have to have that sweaty conversation. It's still not going to be super easy, but it's going to be easier because there is, to your point, there's sort of more built up in the emotional bank account, if you will, of our relationship. Therefore, you're going to probably be more open to some feedback that I have for you, or I might be towards, from you to me, if you've expressed some appreciation to me along the way.
That's another great story from, I can't remember which book, but I know from one of the TED Talks too. Maybe you could tell the story, going back to sports, of you pitching and what the difference would be between appreciation and recognition. So like a lot of people, I don't think really think about the nuance between the two, but it's really important, I think.
Yeah. So remember, recognition is about performance, appreciation is about people. Recognition is about what we do, appreciation is about who we are. So the example that I often share, and I talked about this in one of my TED Talks, and I've written about this in almost all my books, is the difference, the way it played out for me as a baseball player. So I was a pitcher in baseball. And as most people know, even if they're not huge baseball fans, when the pitcher doesn't do well in baseball, they literally stop the game and take you out and replace you with someone else, which is a bit humiliating and frustrating and embarrassing, if you can imagine.
And the whole game stops.
The whole game stops. The whole thing stops. They watch.
Commercial break, everything.
Exactly. But the worst part of that whole experience for me, when I would get taken out in the middle of an inning, is when I would go and sit down in the dugout with my teammates, because especially if I did really bad, nobody would talk to me. They would just like leave me alone. It was kind of an unwritten rule in baseball. Oh, he did bad, he's upset, let's leave him alone. And look, yeah, I was usually upset. But what I needed in those moments was not recognition. Like if I had given up 7 runs in the second inning, I don't need someone to come over and say, hey, way to go, awesome job, Robbins. No, I had failed for the team. We're probably going to lose. I'd obviously failed personally. I got pulled out of the game. But what I needed was some appreciation of me, not the performance, but the human. Like, hey, man, that was rough, but you're an important part of the team, or we got your back. Some way of communicating authentically to me that I was still valued, I was still cared about. And we live in a world, whether it's in a kitchen or on a baseball field or in a corporate boardroom or wherever, that results matter, clearly. So it's not that they don't, but we focus obsessively on the results. We sometimes forget about the people. And behind every success and failure is a human or a group of humans, mostly doing the best they can. And so a big part of leadership and teamwork is about making sure that we consciously and proactively appreciate the people around us.
Mm-hmm. And like you also need a little bit of that to be able to, strap up the laces and get on the mound, for the next start. Maybe 2 days later, since you only win an inning, but
Right. But I mean, at some level, it's also making sure, I think about this even as a parent. It's like, our girls are 14 and 12, and it's like they don't always do things and say things exactly the way I want them to. And as they get older, that's happening even more to some degree. But making sure that they know, I love you no matter what. I will recognize you if you do certain things. It's important for there to be recognition and reinforcement for certain positive behaviors. And let's talk about things when they're not the way we want them to be. This is true with our children. This is true with our friends and family. This is true with the people that we work with. So again, we can have a really high bar of expectation, but it's just got to be coupled with a high level of caring and nurturing at the same time. If those things are out of balance, we're going to have all kinds of problems.
Yeah, well, and that goes to another question I have. I can't read my handwriting over here, but he was asking, how do you walk the maybe sometimes fine line of personal life, professional life. You want to create that emotional connection, but then how far is too far? It can get really interesting and challenging, in this industry where sometimes, alcohol is involved and people going out after work for drinks and, that kind of thing.
Right. Look, I mean, I think it's tricky. I think we all have to figure out healthy boundaries. The reality is sometimes we end up either already being friends with people before we start working together or becoming friends with people as we work together. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. At the same time, knowing our roles, if I'm in charge and you work for me, we can be absolutely friendly and we can have a really great personal relationship. And at the end of the day, I still might have to give you feedback and evaluate you. The downside oftentimes of being really friendly with the people we work with is that we won't always hold them accountable or call them out when that needs to be the case. Mm-hmm. On the flip side, though, what I've also seen is that people then, especially in leadership positions, will kind of keep everyone at arm's length so as to not create those situations where things might happen that are, too personal or, hey, I won't be able to really evaluate them. So look, I mean, I don't think there are a bunch of hard and fast rules. I think we want to build as strong of relationships as we can with people around us, but we always want to be conscious and mindful of the fact that there are certain healthy boundaries that need to be in place with our professional relationships.
Yeah, and how is this going to impact our professional relationship moving forward?
Yeah.
And then going to the final, the fourth pillar, it's all about really, tying all that together and then, creating the best possible work for the team, right? And that's really, I've been spending a lot of time, writing about recently as well as what does it take? So, Mike, in 30 seconds or a minute, what you got?
So what does it take to just really bring it all together and have the team perform?
Yeah, and I mean, in a sense, I know it's more complicated than that, and definitely check out the book. It came out in April. We're all in this together. I have a link to his website here. I actually listened to it, so I like hearing Mike's voice. So I got the audio version, but it's a great book. He's also got a great podcast of the same name. So new leadership advice every single week. So it's good stuff.
Cool, man. Well, thanks. I appreciate you having me on. It's great that we've gotten to stay connected all these years, and I appreciate the good work that you do and everybody who's watching and listening to us.
Yeah. So what does it? I mean, what is there? Kind of a final nugget of like a missing link or piece we haven't kind of talked about really that you can think of that.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, like I love the quote by Peter Drucker where he says, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast," meaning it's all about the culture. It's all about the people. If you think of the best teams you've ever been a part of, you think of the best kitchens you've ever been in or groups you've ever worked with. Yeah, talented people matter. Yeah, having something cool to create and do together matters, having some skill. But at the end of the day, it's really that chemistry of the people and coming together. And that's ultimately what allows a team to be successful or not. And so the more you can focus on that outside of the importance of the work and the skill, the better off it's going to be for everybody.
Yeah, well, maybe to tie kind of come full circle to what we started talking about at the very beginning with like the super teams. A lot of people out here maybe don't have the super team.
Right.
But in the book you talk about, and it's really fascinating. You also check out the paper as well, Project Aristotle. You talk about how so it's not as important of who's on the team. What is it?
It's basically it's about that psychological safety, and it's less about the individuals and more about the structure and the agreements that the group makes. Again, the standards by which, the values by which the team operates has a lot to do with how successful the team is ultimately going to be and the culture that gets created.
Well, and I can speak to that as well, especially in this industry, because give me 30 days with somebody and I can teach them how to cook. I can teach them how to be a front of the house manager or bartender or whatever. Now the personality and with front of the house might be a little bit more challenging, but the gist of it is it's all learnable. Right. So it's not really who, but yeah, how are you bringing everybody together?
Yeah.
Well, Mike, it's been a lot of fun. Any kind of final words for folks out there trying to get through COVID, with this obviously challenging time? I know a lot of people burn out. A lot of people, burn the candle at both ends. Some people, yeah.
Look, I mean, I think it's challenging for all of us for different reasons. My book, We're All in This Together. I think we are all in this together, but it's really more we're all in the same storm, but we're in different boats. So like the more compassion we can have for ourselves and the people around us, I think is really important. And, a friend of mine years ago when I was going through a really tough time, Chris said something to me that I never forgot. He said, Mike, you got to remember, you have more than this requires. And I said, what do you mean? He said, look, you've made it through 100% of the challenges you've ever faced up to this point in your life. And even though I was going through some pretty big challenges at the time and I was scared and overwhelmed, he said to me, there's no reason to believe that you're not going to be able to figure out how to make it through these challenges as well. And I've been thinking about that myself as I've been going through this, and everybody I know, like, this is unprecedented and super challenging for us, especially in the hospitality industry. But we will figure it out and get through it. We've gotten through it up to this point. While it's been bumpy and challenging, there's no reason to believe we won't make it all the way through.
Yeah. So just, I say just, one day at a time.
Exactly.
Well, Mike, thank you, brother. We'll have to do it again soon, man. And take care of you, you and the girls, and we'll talk to you soon, buddy.
Thanks, man.
All right. Cheers. Thanks, guys.